We read in the parsha this week that, which we haven't gotten yet, that there was a famine, and Yitzchak considered going to Mitzrayim, as his father had gone to Mitzrayim. Hashem says, don't leave the land, remain in the land. And it says, well, despite being a famine, he planted that year, and the crop was 100-fold of what a normal crop was, even though it's a famine year. Comes subsequently very wealthy, so on and so forth. Why did he want to leave the land? Because his father left the land. Avram went to Mitzrayim, so he wasn't going to Mitzrayim. Hashem says, no, you can't go to Mitzrayim because you're an Olet Tamimo. That because you're an unblemished offering, you can't leave the land. Can't leave Eretz Yisrael. But yet, when he didn't have children after being married so many years, and his wife was an Akara barren, he didn't consider taking a maidservant, as his father took Hagar. Why? The answer is because he was an Olet Tamima. Because he was this unblemished offering, it would have been inappropriate for him to take the maidservant. Therefore, he remained with Rivka. So he asked, in regard to leave the land, although he knew he was an Olet Tamima, and he wouldn't consider taking a maidservant, that he understood on his own. But yet, when it came to leaving the land, there he had to be told by Hashem not to leave the land. Knowing he was ultimately wasn't enough reason for him not to leave the land. So in one situation, he understood it on his own because of his status. It's inappropriate. And regarding leaving the land, if Hashem would have told him, he would have left the land. What difference is there? Avodah writes in Nefesh HaChaim that we find that Yaakov married two sisters. Why? Because he understood, although they had kept the Torah entirely before it was given, the reason why he married two sisters because he had seen that the only way you were able to establish a Klal Yisrael, he has to marry two sisters. Even though post-Sinai, it would be considered incest. But pre-Sinai, if they understood that's the only way things could evolve and establish themselves, that becomes an overriding factor. But this is pre-Sinai. But post-Sinai, regardless of what you understand, once Sinai was given and the laws are put in place, no reason could justify, and there's no overriding factor that would permit a Jew, from marrying two sisters. Pre-Sinai things were permitted, post-Sinai not. For instance, Amram married Yocheved. Yocheved was Amram's aunt. A nephew marrying an aunt is considered incest. But since it was pre-Sinai, and they were not bound by the laws of the Torah yet, although they would normally conduct themselves based on post-Sinai, but whenever there was an overriding factor, such as having these special children, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, that became an overriding factor. Post-Sinai not. Now, why did Avram went to Egypt? Why did Avram go to Egypt? It says because of the famine. But Chazal tell us, we always say, Masa Ovesim Labanim. Whatever the patriarchs did, that foretold the future. As Avram went to Egypt, Klal Yisrael went to Egypt. As Avram left Egypt with tremendous wealth, Avram left Egypt with tremendous wealth. This was foretelling what was going to be in the future. And that was to establish and set that dynamic that this should evolve in the future. So if that would be the case, in terms of marrying a maidservant, there was no justification. However, going to Mitzrayim, as his father went to Mitzrayim, which set the dynamic of Masa V'Sim Labanim to secure the future, maybe Yitzchak, he should do the same. This would, again, secure it to a greater degree. Masa V'Sim Labanim. Marrying the maidservant has nothing Masa V'Sim Labanim, nothing to do with this. As a result of that, Old Tamim was enough reason for him not to marry the maidservant, but in terms of going to Egypt, maybe, despite that, he would have gone to Egypt. On that, Hashem had to tell him, no, the Masa V'Sim Labanim, that's in place. You don't have to worry about that. Therefore, you being the Old Tamima, you must remain in the land. The Medrash says, it's a Yalkut. When Yitzchak wanted to leave the land, what's the halacha if a person consecrates a korban? Any kind of korban. And you're in the middle and you slaughter it and you have the blood and you take the meat out of the sanctuary before you sprinkle the blood. Even a shlomim, even a meal offering that peace offering they're permitted to eat in Yerushalayim. The moment you take it out of the confines of the sanctuary, it becomes posul, invalidated. It's called psul yotze. It's called psul yotze because it left the confines of the sanctuary, it becomes invalidated. What about if it's a chatos, a sin offering? A sin offering, even after sprinkled blood, the offering has to be eaten in the Azorah. Has to be eaten by the Kohanim. It's called Kodesh Kadoshim, more advanced level of consecration. A meal offering, a sin offering, a guilt offering, all these things have to be eaten in the Azorah, in the sanctuary. If you take it out of the Azorah, it becomes disqualified. Hashem says to Yitzchok, because you're an Ola Tamima, just as when you take an Ola out of the confines of the sanctuary, it becomes puzzled. Eretz Yisrael is the equivalent of the confines of the sanctuary. Leaving Eretz Yisrael means you're going out of the Azori, going out of the sanctuary of holiness. You become invalidated. Therefore, because you invalidate, therefore you can't go out of the confines of Eretz Yisrael. It's a different concept. Marrying the woman who the maidservant, it's not going out of any confines. This is taking the korban out of the confines of the sanctuary. If you go out of Eretz Yisrael, that's taking it outside of the sanctuary. Therefore, you become puzzle. Therefore, you become disqualified. And you're the Ola Tamima. You're the burnt offering. And you need it for what? For atonement. You're the atonement for Klal Yisrael. And if you leave, you become invalidated. You're no longer the atonement for Klal Yisrael. That's the midrash. So I asked the question. Okay, so that's what I was going to tell you. Therefore, one, it's speaking of a different concept. Leaving the land would be disqualification. Marrying the Shivcha Canaanist, it's not a question of disqualification. That, it's just inappropriate. If you're old to me, but you don't marry that kind of woman. But to understand, because I explained to you why, taking it out of that will disqualify you. Now, what's the halacha, the law? I consecrate a sin offering, a burnt offering, and it's alive. And I take it out of confines, I bring it into the sanctuary, take it out of the sanctuary. Doesn't become disqualified. Doesn't become disqualified. The only time it becomes disqualified is once you start the avodah, you slaughter it, and you begin the service, you can't take it out of the azor, out of the sanctuary. But if it's consecrated and it's alive, you can take it any way you want. Even if you take it outside of Eretz Yisrael, it's not disqualified. Yitzchak is a living human being. Even if he's an Ola Tamima, why would he be disqualified? That's the question I asked many years ago. We find that Yitzchak, Avram would have slaughtered Yitzchak, and he would have done whatever you would normally do to the animal, he would do to Yitzchak. Except Hashem says, withdraw your hand, and he sees the ram, and he brings the ram in the place of Yitzchak. Whatever he did to that ram, it was the equivalent he did to Yitzchak. And therefore, Chazal tell us that Afro shel Yitzchak tzarva b'fanav. The ash of Yitzchak is piled before God's eyes. And therefore, whenever there's any prosecution on Klal Yisrael, Yitzchak's existence atones for them. So Yitzchak, even as a living human being, he's always his value is he's always atoning for Klal Yisrael. An animal, before you slaughter it, the chatos, the ola, whatever it may be, until you begin the avoda, it's just an animal. It's a consecrated animal. Yitzchak, till the end of time, is an atonement to quench and silence the prosecution of Sodom. If that's the case, Yitzchak, you're in the middle of the avoda. Middle of avoda, you take the korban outside of the sanctuary, it becomes disqualified. Yitzchak's existence is a continuous atonement for Klal Yisrael. Therefore, take him outside of Eretz Yisrael, take him out of the confines of the Azorah. Therefore, Hashem says you can't leave Eretz Yisrael for that reason. So that he didn't understand. Yitzchak didn't understand that on his own. I'm a living human being. Whatever happened. Everything's in place. Hashem says, no, you're an ongoing atonement. And since we're in the middle of the avodah, leaving the land would be considered a basis for disqualification. Standing. Yes. Here's the question. If you have an ola, and let's say it goes lost, you bring another ola. So you fulfill your obligation with the second ola. The first one, you find it, you wait till it gets blemished and you redeem it or whatever you want to do with it. Here, Yitzchak, the only thing which is the atonement is Yitzchak. Yitzchak has to be the atonement. Only Yitzchak would be the one to silence the prosecution. Only Yitzchak. And as it says in Chazal, it's Afro Shel Yitzchak Tov Lefonav. The burning of the ram is like Yitzchak's ash being piled before Hashem's eyes. If you no, a person has obliged to bring an olah. Bring an animal. If it's animal A, B, or C, it doesn't make a difference. As long as it has the consecration of an olah, it atones the way it's supposed to atone. Here it had to be Yitzchak. Therefore, that intention had to be actualized. How was it actualized in the ram? When you actualized the ram, it was like you brought Yitzchak. So Yitzchak is the atonement. It's not the olah. It's not the ram. It's because the ram was in the place of Yitzchak. It was the equivalent of Yitzchak. When you bring an olah, you have to bring an olah. So it's, whether it's olah A, B, C, or whatever it is, you brought the olah. It has nothing to do with the olah that went lost. It's a consecration of the olah. Here it's Yitzchak. Therefore, it had to be actualized as Yitzchak. Therefore, the ram was in the place of Yitzchak. That's the difference. There's a question which is asked by the Orach HaKodesh. The Torah speaks at length about Avraham Avinu. His chesed, many aspects of his life, which has relevance to Klal Yisrael. You know, the Torah doesn't tell us what Avraham ate for breakfast or how he dressed. Why? Because that information has nothing to do with the involvement and development of Klal Yisrael. But whatever the Torah discusses, that has to do directly with our spiritual development. And we were established to be who we are because of what he had done. That's what the Torah shares with us. Yaakov, the Torah speaks lengthily about Yaakov. From the time in utero until he passes away, all aspects of his life. Who he was, how he invested his life, the struggles with his brother, how he bought the birthright, how he fled, alludes that he spent 14 years in Shem Ve'ever. He went to Lavan, how Lavan cheated him, how he worked for the wives, and how he had those children, how he fled. All the details of Yaakov's life are fleshed out in the Torah. How much the Torah tells us about Yitzchak? Torah doesn't discuss Yitzchak. Yitzchak was born, his mother was barren, she gave birth, Yitzchak. That's about it. He marries, Eliezer finds a wife for him. 20 years they're married, they have no children, they have a child. And then small details, that's the end. Then the blessing of Yitzchak to Yaakov and Esav, that's the end of the story. The Torah doesn't really give us a real understanding of who Yitzchak. Of course, he's a patriarch. Hashem introduces himself to Moshe Rabbeinu and to Yaakov. I'm Elokei Avram, I'm Elokei Yitzchak. So if Hashem says I'm Elokei Yitzchak, evidently Yitzchak was something special. Elokei Yitzchak means he was the Merkava. As Avram was the location of the Shechina, Yitzchak was the location of the Shechina. So he's something exceptional. But what does the Torah tell us? Well, give us some understanding of who he was. And where does the Torah even allude to tell us what is the mention of personness? That's the question Orach Chaim asks. He doesn't go to ask why the Torah doesn't. He just says the Torah doesn't. So how do we know he was at that special level? So he says it's all contained in the first letter of this parsha. Ve'ela told us Yitzchak ben Avram. Vav is always and. That's always a connecting letter. Until now, we were speaking about Avram Avinu. How Avram Avinu passed away and he was buried by Yitzchak and Yishmael. Now we speak about told us Yitzchak. The Vav means, and Yitzchak is a continuum of his father. That's how we know who Yitzchak was. That Torah is alluding to the dimension of Yitzchak. But the question is still not answered. Right? So let the Torah tell us, what do we have to allude to it? Tell us who he was. Give us a little more understanding of his life, rather than these small details, which the Torah does mention. The Torah, first of all, it's referred to as Akedah Yitzchak. Even though it's called Akedah Yitzchak, it was Avram's test. It was not Yitzchak's test. Right? Avram is the one who has the claim to fame because of the Akedah, not Yitzchak. Even though Chazal tells Yitzchak was 37 years old, he could have resisted and not allow his father to do it. But he accepted his father's communication. He said, "This is the prophecy. I'm meant to bring you as an Ola." And he agreed. And even on the way, because he asked his father, "Where's the sheep? You have everything. You have the knife, you have the fire, you have the wood. Where's the sheep?" He says, "Hashem will show off the sheep," meaning the ram. If there's no ram, it'll be you. He's okay. But even earlier, the Torah says, Achra dvarim ha'eler. What is Achra dvarim ha'eler? So Rashi cites two interpretations. After these words, there was a discussion between Yishmael and Yitzchak. Yishmael was priding himself. He says, you know who I am? Spiritually, I'm better than you are. At the age of 13, I was circumcised. You were circumcised at the age of 8 days. You really had no choice. You weren't even aware what was happening to you. I could have resisted, but yet I was agreeable to enter into the covenant as an adult. Therefore, I am better than you. Yitzchak says to Yishmael, this is Achat Varmayl, after this discussion. If Hashem would ask me to give my life to be slaughtered like an animal, I would be agreeable to do it. That's what Yitzchak said to Yishmael. That's Achat. And because he accepted that, that's the reason why the 10th death was presented in that context, that Yitzchak should be brought as a sacrifice. That's one of the interpretations Rashi cites from the Midrash. Achar hadvorim eile, after this discussion between Yishmael and Yitzchak. Okay? So that has nothing to do, he bade his father, but you'd say he was great. He was agreeable to give his life. There's a mitzvah of chol nafshecho. A Jew has to give his life for God, correct? So what? Is that's your claim to fame? I mean, it's exceptional if a person does. But Yitzchak's a lot more than that. To be qualified as the patriarch, he's a lot more than what he was agreeable to be slaughtered as the korban. And especially the test is ascribed to his father, not to himself. Akedis Yitzchak because he was the object. But in terms of the challenge, it was Yitzchak's challenge. Avram's challenge, not Yitzchak's challenge. So again, why does the Torah give us a little more understanding, details of Yitzchak's life? That's the question. So good. The Vav tells us who he was in terms of dimension of person. He's a continuum of his father. As I said, it's Elokei Yitzchak. He's Elokei Yitzchak and he was worthy to be the location of the Shechina, the Merkava. Of course, he was exceptional. But why does the Torah share a little bit, give us an understanding of who he was? The Rambam writes in Hilchos Yisodei Torah that, Malochim, we speak of angels, we say every day in davening, Chofanim, Chayis HaKodesh, the different echelons of angels. Chayis HaKodesh are the greatest angels. Then you have the Seraphites, you have the Ophanim. And in the Tefillah of Yom Kippur, we speak about different kinds of angels. Endless names refer to the angels, praising Hashem. Many levels and echelons of angels. Now, the angel who's at the lowest level, the Rambam says is called Ish. Why is it called Ish? Ishim. Ishim, because when a prophet prophesizes, the prophecy is delivered through an angel to the mortal, to the Navi. Because that angel has relevance to the Ish, to the mortal, therefore the angel is classified as Ish, rather than the others. The other angels have no relevance to the human being. It's a different level. It's not within the proximity of what a human being, but because there is a connection between the angel and the human being, delivering the prophecy, therefore it's called Ish. It's called Ish. The Rambam writes that when the Navi sees an angel, what does he look like? What does he look like? So the Rambam says, and this is based on the Psuk verses in Navi, he looks like a child with wings. That's what he looks like. Because a prophet being a human being, everything is visualized. It's called the chazon. Everything is a visual, and when the angel speaks to him, it looks like a young child with wings speaking to the Navi, or a young person. It's the Rambam. Why does he speak to him as a prophet, as a malach? What does he have to come in visually in human form? Because a human being could only process something within the human context. The message has ramifications which touches eternity and beyond eternity. It touches upon the infinite. But to be able to have the capacity to process and grasp it, it has to manifest itself within parameters, within limitation. Otherwise, the person can't. He can't comprehend what it is. Therefore, there's a visual. Therefore, the message is very concise and very specific. That's how a Navi prophesizes. Yitzchak, as what was his attribute? Yitzchak was a malach. We find Yitzchak had very interaction with people. Avram was involved, chesed, hosting people, interaction. That was chesed. Yaakov is Ishtam Yoshevolim. He was involved in the dissemination of Torah also. That's V'nikra b'shem Hashem. Calling the name of Hashem, disseminating monotheism to Yitzchak. We don't find this. Yitzchak, after that, had to spend 3 years on top of Mount Moriah. Then he marries his wife. He was coming from the field. He was praying. He was a dimension of being. He was indescribable. In terms of who he was, you weren't able to relate. If the Torah would give us facts, there's no way the Torah could share facts with us. He was a tzaddik. What kind of tzaddik? When we get into the details, it's beyond that. They're not fathomable. If you're Avram, you could fathom it. You're Yaakov, you could fathom it. But other than that, you can't fathom who he was. As you can't fathom what a malach was, a malach is, you can't fathom who he is. Therefore, the Torah only shares with us details which has relevance to us, which we could grasp to a degree. So how do we know it's the mention of a person? Vav. Whatever Avram was, Vav. Whatever Avram was in his context, in his value, versus Klal Yisrael, Yitzchak was no less. That's Ve'ela told us Yitzchak. That's the way I explained it.
That's very nice, Rabbi. The Shvila Pinchas brings out the Chizkuni from Shabbos. He says that Yitzchak, after the Akedah, went right to Gan Eden for 3 years. And he goes,
I saw the Chizkuni, yeah.
Yeah. And
spent 3 years, whatever that means.
Whatever that means. But it sort of stems with what you're saying, what the Rebbe is saying right now. He's, such a level. Yeah.
I'll give you an example. If you read the biography of Moshe Feinstein, if you're involved in learning your whole life, you're amazed of who he was, what he knew and how he knew it, and what he was able to accomplish in a short amount of time, learning-wise, every-wise. But if you don't have any background and you meet the man, he looks like a little holy man. Long black coat, black hat, beard. And you tell he comes from Russia, and he speaks languages, and he did this. But you realize that's not who he is. He's a giant in human form. He's not describable in terms of his genius, in terms of his recall, in terms of his knowledge, many levels. His tefillah. Whenever he would give a bracha, although he wasn't a Hasidic rabbi, if he would give a bracha, the bracha would actually come to fruition. All this, how do we even relate to it? Because if you have any inkling of who he was, then you'd understand why he's that. And even then, you still don't understand. That's a semblance of what we're talking about. It has no relevance to it.
Rabbi, couldn't we?
Rosh Hashiva is a Chrein of Rocha, just what it